Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Into the Deep podcast with Father Theodore and me, David Guirguis. Today we are joined by Lilyan Andrews, who just recently came out with a new book called Waiting and Dating. And so our topic of discussion today is going to be on dating. So Lillian, if you want to go ahead and introduce yourself and kind of your background and anything you want the audience to know, go ahead.
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you for having me on. I'm a big fan of the podcast, and I love what you are doing with it. So, a little bit about me. My background is actually in engineering. That's kind of what I do for a living. But a couple of years ago, I kind of started blogging and writing, and then got a life coaching certification. Got really interested in helping people navigate relationships and dating, and that's kind of where this book was born from. It's been a long process, but thank God, by His grace, it's out here now, and we're going to be talking about it today.
Yeah, I think it's actually really nice to, you know, dating for anybody who's does what I do as a priest. It's something that gets talked about a lot. People ask a lot of different questions, and when you think about the landscape as far as like resources for us as Orthodox Christians to fall back on, it's really few and far between, especially in English. So I was really excited to see that there was like somebody from a daughter of the church, coming out with something like that, with the kind of experience that you've had, and the sort of the all the in-depth things that you're able to sort of share. And I really I'm excited to sort of get into a little bit of the concepts that you talked about and discussed within the book, because I think it's going to be really beneficial and really helpful for everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. And, when I was looking for a resource to give people I was coaching who were Orthodox, I couldn't find one in English, like you mentioned, Abuna. So I, did some more research. And yes, there's helpful articles and maybe, talks and sermons and other things, but nothing that was kind of traditionally published that we could refer to. And, that's kind of where the idea came from writing it.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think I hope this encourages more people to do kind of what you did, is like not just about dating, but lots of topics, because I think a lot of what you wrote. You're, like you said, there are snippets of it in maybe a sermon here or an article there, or things like that. But to have one comprehensive place to say, hey, you read this book and it'll be really helpful for you to gain some insights on to date in a godly way, or to deal with singleness, or even help in marriage. I especially, we'll get into it later, but you have stuff for everybody sort of in this book, which I really liked.
So we kind of got into the reasoning behind why you decided to write this book, and I think it's great, especially because I grew up in Coptic Orthodox, and I kind of, all I had to go off of was kind of my parents just saying don't date, and it never was really enough for me. So I was excited to read into this, and actually I learned a lot that I wish I would have known growing up. And so like I also have a little sister who's about to turn 17. And so I'm glad that she'll have a resource like this that I wish I had, at that time, because I feel like it does teach you a lot that maybe is kind of skipped over, kind of being translated from the older generation to us. So I'm glad that this book is out now.
I was going to say, maybe we can get into a little bit of sort of some of the meat of the book. I wanted to, the book's really kind of put into three parts, which I really like, like waiting and dating, and the struggle, which I think is more concerned about dealing with purity, both in singleness and within marriage. As far as like, I thought something that was really nice, you sort of laid out three main reasons for marriage. Maybe you can share with us what are those reasons, and how does that sort of help, like, sort of define for myself what I should be looking for or not looking for when I'm thinking about a spouse.
Yeah, so a lot of the church fathers, and it was a quote from St. Augustine in particular, who talks about the three reasons for marriage being procreation, fleeing sexual immorality, and then this marital bond between husband and wife. And, we see it all the way from the beginning with Adam and Eve, when God told them to go forth and multiply and be fruitful. And that's one gift that comes out of marriage, the ability to have children and to procreate. The other one, fleeing sexual immorality, we see that also in the Bible, but in the New Testament, when St. Paul is talking in 1 Corinthians chapter 7, and he says, flee sexual immorality. And he even says, I wish for you to be like me, where he was a single man. And he says, I just want to please the Lord. I don't have to worry about pleasing a spouse. Obviously, I'm paraphrasing the chapter here. But he says, but if you can't, have a spouse so you don't fall into sexual immorality. And then the other thing we see from Ephesians 5, which is this union between husband and wife and how it's supposed to reflect the relationship between Christ and the church. The idea of wives submit to your own husbands as to the Lord, and husbands love your wives, just as Christ also loved the church and gave up, himself for her and died for her. And it's this sanctification process that we go through to make it to the kingdom. We want to kind of get rid of all these flaws that we have. We want to perfect the love and the sacrifice the same way, Christ did for us, and reflect that in our marriage to help us get to salvation, which is ultimately our goal.
The part that struck me is that I really enjoyed the positive spin, or the positive nature that where you're looking at marriage. I think sometimes, like within Orthodoxy, because especially in the Coptic Orthodox Church being like the place where monasticism began, I think there's a lot of emphasis on the blessings and the spirituality of singleness, chastity for the Lord, which of course is a wonderful thing and is a blessing to those who pursue it. But I think it's good to acknowledge that is for most people not going to be their path, and B, the path of marriage is something holy and sanctified and positive. God gave that to Adam and Eve, and when he made his creation, he made it perfectly. So marriage is something that is holy and sanctified, and is not sort of like the lesser, sometimes I think sometimes we sort of view it as a concession, like, okay, I guess, get married then. But especially, that's why I really like that third reason that you were talking about, sort of the making holy of the person, the way that they are going to achieve their salvation is through the bond of marriage, learning to love, learning to sacrifice, learning to give, of themselves for another person.
Okay, yes, Abuna, you're absolutely right with that. Actually, St. John Chrysostom, now that I'm on a Coptic podcast, I can pronounce it that way. He tells us, remind one another that nothing in life is to be feared except offending God. And he says, if your marriage is like this, your perfection will rival the holiest of monks. So it's not just that holiness can only be attained by the monks and the nuns, but also by the married people.
I think that's something super important to keep in mind. Like a life of holiness is not something reserved for people who are single or people who are clergy, but that's something that we're all called to.
And so I know the book is probably targeting more of like the dating crowd, but as someone who is, recently married within the last, 3 years, is there any benefit to newlyweds reading the book? Is there what can they expect to kind of gain from it that could benefit them in their marriage?
Yeah. So, I'm honored that newlyweds and married people want to pick up the book, because they really, did just finish the dating phase. And I'm sure it was something that each of them had a different experience through. But I would say maybe the first chapter of the book is a good reminder of, what a Christian marriage is all about, why we're getting married in the first place, what our goal is as a married couple. And then really part 3 of the book, which talks about purity and maybe unlearning or relearning some things that we might have grown up with, like around purity culture. So I think maybe people now who are in their 30s, plus or minus a few years, depending where you grew up, what kind of messages you heard growing up in the church around that. There's a lot of misconceptions out there, and I think that follows you into marriage as well. I think a lot of times we were told, sex is bad or don't do it, and it's a sin, stay away from it, it's correct. If you're single and you're not married, that's not what it's there for. That's not how God purposed it. But then once you get married, it's not like this automatic switch you can just flip and now you can view it in a positive light the way that God intended for it. So relearning that, takes a lot of time, that mindset shift around it where you're seeing it as a holy thing. That is talked about in chapter 7 and 8 of the book. And then a few, other topics as well that I think married people can benefit from in that section.
Yeah, I think actually I know we're jumping around a little bit, but like in the third part of the book, I really, really enjoyed that part because it really resonated with me. Many things resonated with me. First of all, like, as a priest, I have many people coming to me after they're married, struggling with lust or struggling with various things of purity. But the misconception that, high schoolers or engaged couples or, college students think is, okay, I have this problem with lust or with purity. I know how we will solve that. I will get married. And then once I get married, that will end that because, of course, I have this natural outlet that is, designed for this. And so I'm going to be fine. And as much as I try to warn people, hey, actually, I don't think that that's the case. This is an internal thing that you have to struggle with and will continue to struggle with, if not, struggle with. One of the things you said in the book that I remembered, because I always say this to them as well, is like, you think it's bad when you're single. When you're married, you're now bringing in another person into the problem. And so I really like that you highlighted that because I think it's something very important, both for married people to know and for people who are approaching marriage to understand that.
Yeah, absolutely. You're 100% right with that, Abuna. People think, oh, I have this problem, watching porn or lust or whatever it might be. And then my solution to that is I'm going to get married. That's not the solution. If anything, that makes the problem even worse. It doesn't go away, just because you get married now and you have a spouse. It makes it a lot more complicated and a lot harder to also get out of it. So I always tell people who are single or who are engaged, this is not going to solve your problem. Work on it now. You have to get that under control as best as you can before entering into a marriage.
Can I ask a question about that actually? Because in some conversations that I've had with people, they've said to me, because I struggle with this sin, I don't think I'm fit for marriage. And until I completely get rid of this sin in my life, I should not even consider, dating or getting married, because how could I bring someone into this problem? And I would love I have opinions about this, but I'd love to get, your input on what you think about that.
Yeah, that's a heavy thing to carry for sure. It's not something that people want to, willingly walk into when you're into, in a relationship with that. So I would say it varies. It varies based on like, okay, is this an addiction? How frequently am I falling into this? Is this something I struggled with years ago? Maybe I've relapsed a few times here and there, but I'm, doing well overall. Or is this something I'm still really struggling with actively and I don't have it under control whatsoever? So the variation of like where you are in your struggle and how much you've overcome, that's kind of how I would advise people. So, nobody's perfect. There's always going to be a relapse. Even if we're talking about any kind of addiction, they teach you that, when you do relapse, there's a way to get back up and not be overcome by that, quote unquote failure. And it's an ongoing process. So I would say get to a stage or a phase where you are not overcome by the sin so much as you used to be, that you've seen some kind of improvement, and then get guidance, obviously, from your father of confession. And if you do need, professional help, like a therapist or any kind of, support group, there's a lot of support groups out there for this sort of thing, like AA and different things. Well, AA is for Alcohol Anonymous, but there's other, groups for that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think your answer is absolutely right. I think the simple answer, the quick answer is it depends, right? There's so many variables to that. But I do want to make sure that people understand, like, it's not just a prerequisite of like, if I ever fall in this sin, this means I am therefore unfit, for marriage. I think people sometimes are overly harsh on themselves in that sense. I think that there is Yes, it's not something that is good. Yes, it's something that I need to work on. But there are varying degrees, and I should, speak to my spiritual father, speak to, those who I trust, to hopefully sort of get me a good assessment of sort of where I am in that. That's good. Speaking of then of like the people that I trust, in the first part of the book, you talk about what you considered or you talked about as your circle of guidance. Can you tell me a little bit about that in regards to sort of my period of waiting and even in my period of like sort of beginning to meet people that I'm going to potentially marry?
Yeah, absolutely. So your circle of guidance really should consist of, the wise people in your life who are guiding you. So that's maybe your family members, like your parents, if they're in the picture, or somebody who is like a father figure or a mother figure in your life. You are also talking to your father of confession or your spiritual father to guide you through, all the things that you're struggling with, whether it's dating or everything else. They kind of know who you are, your personality. So when the time does come and you do introduce them to somebody who is a potential partner, they can help you, assess if this is the right person for you. And then there's also the third category are your mentors. This can be, maybe a coach you grew up with, a teacher, a Sunday school servant or leader, somebody that you trust, somebody who can guide you through this stage because they've been through it, if they've done it successfully or at least as best as they can. And these are the people who are going to maybe see some things that you might be blind to if you have that strong attraction with the person that you're dating, and maybe you're blind to a few things that they're seeing as red flags. They should be the people warning you and really advising you as you progress forward.
I really like that concept of the circle of guidance. One of the things that I talk to people a lot about when we sort of look at the difference between dating in the Eastern world versus dating in the Western world, or marriage even in the Eastern versus the Western world. Sort of in the Eastern world, it's more of a communal thing. Like who I marry is my sisters and moms and dads and mentors' business, right? Whereas we think about it in the West as a much more personal thing. But actually, I prefer that way of a communal thing because, as most people who are married know, is like you marry into a family. You marry into sort of you have a mother-in-law, a father-in-law, you have siblings, you have brothers-in-laws and sisters-in-laws, all sorts of dynamics. So having that circle of guidance, I think, is super important. The question I had, like I was thinking about it as I was reading, is there a place, or what place is there for my peers, like the people who are close to me, know me best, but maybe are in the same boat as me? They're dating, or maybe just recently married, or they're kind of where I am, but they're my close friends. They're not explicitly mentioned in my circle of guidance, but where do you think they've fallen?
No, that's a very good question. So I kind of put them outside of the circle as like your support system. They might not be giving you, the best advice because they're in the same boat. They haven't gone through it, right? They're still also trying to figure it out. Maybe you do have some wise friends, or maybe a few friends who are a bit older who've gone through it. Maybe that's a little bit different. But they are your support system. You need them. You need them to, kind of talk things through with them. They're really good at listening, at being there for you, having a shoulder to cry on, somebody to go to when things aren't going well, somebody who, understands the struggles you're going through, whether it's loneliness, whether it's like frustration with dating or whatever it might be. They can really relate and show a lot of empathy in that place.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, I think friends are good in conjunction with, like you said, like kind of like a support group. It's important. And I tell people, like, if they're dating somebody and all their friends don't like that person that you're dating, you should really think about that. Your friends want what's best for you, and if they're like, yeah, we don't like him, or we don't like her, and it's like, I think that's something to sort of to keep in mind. I had a question as far as like my family. When I like what I've seen sometimes when I've been talking to some people is, they're dating, a guy and girl are dating, and then all of a sudden they have like whatever sort of disagreement. Should I share that with my family, like my mom, my dad, or not? The people, like, the reason I ask is, like, some people, they have those disagreements, they share it with their parents. Their parents grow to have some sort of like hatred, resentment, whatever towards that person. whereas you as the person in the relationship have forgiven and moved on, and now they're continuing. And but the people who, that are in your corner have your back, they maybe have that, like, mama bear mentality, and I think which actually is great, but at the same time can maybe hinder the relationship. So are there things, like, is there a time to say and not say, or what do you think about, like, that dynamic? Should I tell my parents sort of everything? Should I sort of, like, whitewash it a little bit to make it sound better? Like, what should I do?
No, that's a great question. And I think, the same concept applies also when you're married. When you have a problem with your spouse, what do you do? And it's usually recommended that you don't, go back to your parents and kind of dissect with them what's going on. It's always wise to maybe go to like a neutral third party. A lot of times that's the priest. Could be maybe like you're also seeing a therapist or a counselor or whoever you've kind of been working with, if you are working with anybody, and they can give you the best guidance because they're not taking your side, or your spouse's side because of whoever they're related to, but they're there to help the marriage as a whole. Like, they want the success of you as a couple, not, you versus, the wife or the husband. And they are kind of the best people to not catch feelings, if we're going to put it that way, and be overly defensive. It's okay to, obviously to talk to your parents if you're looking for deciphering certain things when you're dating, like, hey, do you think this is okay? This kind of made me feel a certain way. What do you think? And kind of bouncing some ideas off of them as you're discerning if this is the right person. But, be wise with how you do it. And also circle back with them. So let's say you talk to them about an issue you're having when you're dating. You resolve the issue. Make sure you come back and say, okay, we resolved it. We're good now. So you
Yes.
don't have to, hold these, ill feelings towards the other person.
I can really relate to that circling back thing, because there have been many times people come to me and they say, oh my gosh, this person did this to me, and they did this to me, and they did this to me. And then they'll come and they'll complain again, and he did this and he did that and he did this. And then, 2 months later, like, we're getting married. And I'm like, wait, why? Like, I thought it was terrible. And they're like, no, Buna, actually this happened and this happened and this and this. And I'm like, oh, it's, when you're really upset, you're maybe painting it in a certain way. Whereas, the reality is actually it's overall, not as bad as sort of I'm picturing. So the looping back is super important. I think the way that I sometimes think about it is, maybe before marriage, it's very important for me to say, like, hey, is this normal? Is this right? This thing happened. Is this, something that I should expect? Do you ever do this with mom and dad, like mom or whatever? And, I'm getting guidance from someone who's hopefully had a happy marriage before me. But then after marriage, I think that neutral party thing is super important, because you want someone who's sort of in it for your success as a married couple, not in it for, me as a son or you as a daughter's, success individually. So I think that's really sound advice.
I feel like setting boundaries is also probably a huge part of your circle of guidance, just because, coming from California to Tennessee, there was like a huge kind of culture shock where, like, people here are a lot more, like, they're a lot more protective and seems like guarded. And so I can imagine it's probably pretty difficult to go from having your family and all these people around you as your circle of guidance, and then kind of overnight switching it to your husband or wife, and then, previously you would go to this group of people to get advice on how to deal with, certain things in a relationship. But now how do you kind of flip the switch to, okay, now I just have, me and this other person to kind of work through these things with? I mean, can that cause any issues, or kind of what advice do you have for setting boundaries maybe for something like that?
Yeah, so this is like a tricky thing to kind of figure out, because yes, you do want to set boundaries. We're not airing our dirty laundry out there for everybody. And there are things that I think should only be discussed between husband and wife, and they can, figure it out together. There also are other things, certain topics, maybe less sensitive, that you do want the input of people who can guide you. This is something I always recommend to a couple who's engaged. And, I would love to see this happen more in our community, where, you as a young couple, you're getting married. or maybe you're newlyweds, find an older couple who's been married, I don't know, 10, 15, 20, 30 plus years, and make them kind of your mentors, where you're both going to them. You're saying, hey, you know what? We really love how they've built their home, how they've raised their children. I really want to learn more from them. Can I sit down with them? Can they guide us both together? It's a little bit harder to practice that and to find it, but if you can, I think that's a great thing. So that way, again, it's a neutral third party. It's not my parents or your parents. And then as a couple, discuss, and set the boundaries together. What are we comfortable sharing? What are we comfortable not sharing? How are we going to resolve our arguments and disagreements? And make sure you're just on the same page with that. Some couple might be more open to outside help. Some couples might not be, and kind of see where you fall there.
I wanted to ask a question about dating itself. And you mentioned in the book sort of, do I know what I want before I'm opening a door? And for me personally, what I see people doing a lot of times, and we even say it in a phrase when we talk about like falling in love, it's almost like this accidental thing that happens and that I wasn't really like prepared for, or I just happened to be at the right place at the right time, and he was there and she was there, and it sort of just happened, kind of a thing. And it seems to me a little bit that you're, I don't want to say that you're not trying to be romantic, but at the same time, I think that you're sort of advising a little bit more intentionality of like, hey, like as I'm beginning to date, I want to be pretty crystal clear internally with myself about, the personality traits that I have, the personality traits that I want, the faith that I have, the faith that I want, the values that I have, and the values that I want. Maybe you can speak a little bit to those things and how that can affect the success or failure within dating.
Yeah. So I'm a very logical person. That's my engineering.
I could tell the engineering. Yeah, I think the engineering came out a little bit in that, because I liked what you were saying, but I was like, oh, people, the romantics might not like what you were writing.
But I mean, you could still be romantic within logic. You're not kind of going off the rails there.
Spoken like a true engineer. Yes.
Yes. So it's always good to know what I'm looking for, because if I don't know what I'm looking for, then I'm out there, I'm going to just chase anything that I see that's, a little bit of attractive or something that I'm curious about. And then you never know where you're going to end up with that. So having a clear vision of, these are my values, this is who I am, being self-aware first, right? We have to understand who we are and who we are in Christ. And, take that knowledge and say, okay, who is going to match me? Who's going to be a good fit and a good partner for me to help me in this goal of salvation? And, having that, whether you want to write it out, you want to kind of have it in your head or just aware of it, and looking for those characteristics and traits and qualities. I tell people, hey, you want to gauge if somebody is a good fit, just look at the fruit of the Spirit, right? Do they have the love, the peace, the joy in their life? Are they kind? Are they forgiving? Can they suffer long? And do they have self-control? And all of those virtues that are going to make a good spouse. If I don't have clear direction of like what I'm looking for, I might be, blinded by a lot of things, by charm, by charisma, by, this chemistry or these fireworks that people are looking for, that we've kind of been sold in, the general media of, this is what you're supposed to feel like when you're in love, or this is how it's the right person. But these things are fleeting, right? Your emotions are going to be up and down. You get married and there's a lot of commitment that goes into that. It's not just going to be fireworks all the time, and it's not going to be, chasing these butterfly feelings. It's going to be some real work. So pick somebody who can do that work with you.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think that that comes to another part of the book that I really liked. You mentioned something, said everybody, when they, they come, everybody that, like church goers, and they say like, what are you looking for in a spouse? And they say, oh, I want someone who is God-fearing. And that is incredibly vague because, and actually in my experience, I find people say that they want someone who's God-fearing and they mean millions of different things. Some people are like, if this man does not attend every tazbaha, I don't want him. And other people are like, as long as he goes to church once a month, like I'm cool. And so I want to ask a couple of questions about that. Like, should I, as I'm dating, do I want to marry like a saint? Do I want to marry someone who's way better than me? Do I want to marry someone who's like me? Do I want to marry someone who's not as spiritual as me? Like, what am I supposed to be like looking for there?
Yeah. So, I always think that you are going to kind of attract who you are. So if I'm somebody who's going to church and I'm committed, that's kind of where I'm going to meet people, right? If I'm never there in church, if I'm only showing up on, the holidays, then probably not going to, meet people in that sort of community that way. So this idea of like, do I want somebody who's holier than me, or should I be holier than them? First of all, like, how are we actually measuring this, right? We're not. How are we comparing this?
Yes, exactly.
We're not going to sit there and say, okay, how many times do you pray? How much do you fast? How much of your Bible do you read? But it's more about like, are we striving towards the same thing? Are we both trying to really struggle in our walk with Christ to pursue the narrow path? Your pursuit of God should look similar. So that comes out in like your level of commitment to the church, to your own spiritual growth, to your community in terms of ministry and service. Are all your goals aligning of what you're chasing and what you're striving towards? That's how you can really decipher if somebody is God-fearing in the same way that you are.
Yeah, I think the goals aligning thing that you mentioned is super important because like St. Paul tells us about not being unequally yoked. And from a very practical standpoint, if I want to be sort of engulfed within service, right, and my spouse actually doesn't care for that. At the very best, she's going to be accommodating of what I'm doing, and at the least, she could be antagonistic towards what I'm doing. But if we're on the same page, that either we both want to be very or just at the same page with our level of desire of investment, that makes things smoother. I as I was preparing one of the notes I put, and I was going to ask you this is, what do you think about the concept of opposites attract? And for me personally, when I think about opposites attract, I think that's cool for like little things. Like, you like comedies, I like, suspense, you like sushi, I like steak. That's little things. Cause then our interests can complete each other and make us like learn about new aspects of life that we wouldn't have known. But I think when it comes to like the very important things, and you mentioned like personality and faith and values, actually the more we're alike, the less friction there's going to be. No matter what, when you get married, there's going to be some friction of, here are two people that we're making into one, and there's going to be a little friction there. But the least amount of friction happens when there is, I think maybe less about this concept of opposites attracting. I don't know what you think about that.
Yeah, so I think it depends what we're referring to as opposites. So I think of when like you mentioned, like the small things, doesn't matter so much, but the big things are the important things to get on the same page. So in terms of, maybe personality or little quirks here and there, or things that you're passionate about, these things can be opposite, right? Maybe I'll have an introvert and an extrovert, and they'll complement each other. Maybe someone will kind of bring you out of your shell. You'll bring them a little bit more, home at times when they need to. But the big things like your faith, your values, the fundamental things that, you build your relationship on, the virtues that you're looking for in one another, your core beliefs, these are the things that we don't want to be on opposite sides. We want to be on the same page here. I think God built us all differently, and to be very unique individually. And it's a beautiful thing when two individuals come together in a marriage and really support each other. And when we admire, certain traits that my spouse might have that I don't have. There's a lot of things that I look in my husband and I say, oh, wow, I really like how he does this, or he's really good at that. I can learn from him in that. Are we opposites on some of those things? Sure, maybe. But on the big things, we have the same vision and we're on the same page.
Yeah, and going back to what you said a little bit earlier about like looking at the person, like are they God-fearing or not? You mentioned like the fruit of the Spirit, and I want to take a second to talk about like sort of the difference between the outward actions of spirituality and the inward actions of a spiritual life. Actually, when people say like, oh, I go to church every week and I'm there early and I always go to Vespers and I always and I fast every fast, from the outside, that seems like a very spiritual person. And I don't think you can be a spiritual person without going to church, but you can definitely be a non-spiritual person and go to church. You know what I mean? So I think it's important for people to recognize, like, it's not just check boxes of like, do they do this thing or not, but actually the inward fruit of the Spirit that you discover within the context of who they are, how nice they like. You mentioned a nice story in the book about like how do they treat like the restaurant workers, like how do they like interact with them? Do they do that kindly? Are they patient? Those are, I think, important measures of spirituality, not just those external things. I think that falls under the category of these things you ought to have done without leaving the others undone. I'm not saying we should, marry someone who never goes to church, but I'm saying just because they go to church doesn't necessarily mean that person is, going to end up in the Synaxar one day,
Yeah. And unfortunately, that's kind of the reality sometimes. Some of the worst dating stories I've heard from people are from, dating someone in the church. And I'm like, oh man, it shouldn't be this way. But they're like, oh, but they were a deacon, or, she was a Sunday school teacher. It doesn't mean much that we're doing these things. Our intention behind it matters a lot. And it's hard to really figure out someone's intentions unless you really get to know them. You get to watch them, actions speak louder than words. How are they behaving? Does this align with what they're saying? And really analyzing things from that perspective.
So I kind of have a question on things that people should be looking for when they think they might have a potential candidate that they are interested in. What are some of the like main bullet points or things to kind of really investigate and look into to know if this person would be a good match, or if they'll help help me in my goal of getting closer to God?
Yeah. So in the book, I break down these five different areas of compatibility. I call them the 5 F's, which are faith, future, fun, friends/family, and fighting. And, a little bit on each of those categories. So faith is, something that we talked about, of having that same common goal of where you're heading, how you are, pursuing your relationship with Christ and with the church. Make sure you're on the same page there, so that you are equally yoked. The future, when you talk about how you want to live your life in the future, how you are going to pursue your career, or maybe manage your finances, or what you want your family and children to look like, and that kind of lifestyle. Do you both agree on those things? Fun is, I think, a little bit underrated. It's, do we actually enjoy each other's company? Can we, have fun together? And it doesn't seem like this, like just, you're good on paper, but really there's no connection there. And then family and friends, what's their influence going to look like? Do I like your family? Do you like mine? Can they get along? What are maybe some of the things that we're going to have to navigate if there are issues there? Because not every family is perfect, and it also is not a reflection of who you are or the partner that you choose. And then, your fighting styles, or how you argue, how you are able to resolve conflict. When a couple comes to me and says, oh, we don't fight, or we haven't fought and we've been together for 6 months, I tell them, okay, then you're probably just avoiding things. You're sweeping things under the rug because you don't want to disturb the peace. But it's going to all come out one day. You're going to kind of see an explosion come out if you don't talk about the things that you're unhappy with, or maybe some of your needs. So figure out how you also resolve conflict, because that's very important. So as you're checking all of these things in compatibility, as you're getting to know who they are, their character a little bit more, you're seeing them in different areas, whether it's one-on-one, in a friend group, with family, in community, out in public with strangers. See them under all these different lights, and it'll allow you to really assess if this is the right person for me.
I think that's as I'm kind of going through this and each of these bullet points, I kind of think back to when I was in the dating phase before marriage, and I kind of have a little bit of a unique situation just because we were long distance at first, me being in California and her being in Tennessee. And I'm curious what kind of impact or that you've seen maybe with people that you've worked with, or one of the people that you've coached or talked to on what kind of like roadblocks are there when distance is involved? I mean, because you can't really observe them in each of these categories as frequently as you'd like, and maybe you're just getting like a summary version of each one. And so how do you kind of navigate that?
Yeah. Long distance is usually a little bit trickier and not impossible, just maybe an added level of difficulty that you have to navigate versus somebody who, gets to see their partner often. So when you do meet, try to see them in all of these different scenarios as best as you can. Not just taking the one-on-one dates, because anybody can tell you what they want. I can act a certain way when I'm with you, but in reality, when I'm under a different light, I might look a little bit different. So try as best as you can to see them in those scenarios. That will help. Also, just getting to know their friends, whether it's through, face to face, or if there is some kind of communication, either, with your partner or in other ways. They say that your friend group will kind of reflect who you are, right? They say, show me your 5 closest friends and I'll show you who you are, kind of thing. And then if you know people in that area, Dave, I don't know if you knew anybody in Tennessee who you called up and you're like, hey, I'm getting to know this person. I trust you. What do you think? That always helps. Kind of a little background check, doesn't hurt. All of these different things can help.
Yeah, absolutely. I really loved at the end of chapter 5. You were very specific. Like, here's some really nice questions to ask yourself, and to ask about your potential partner about compatibility. Because I mean, I agree with you. I think sometimes, in the pressure to want to be in a relationship, to not be alone, to want to get married, we may overlook these things. I was just speaking with somebody recently, and they were dating this person, and they said, oh, he's great, he's amazing, blah, 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 all these things. And they said, well, but actually, when I was talking to them, one wants to live in one country and another one wants to live in a whole other country. And I was telling them, I was like, okay, well, you literally can't live in both. What do you plan on doing? And they were like, well, we're just not really talking about that right now. And thankfully, like, they eventually, like, they're like, okay, we need to figure this out, and well, we'll see what happens. But that concept that, like, we sometimes smooth over, really, like, actually things that can't be compromised. They're binary. Either we're going to do this or we're going to do that. And so if we're not willing to have those kind of hard discussions, maybe we're really great, but we're actually not compatible, because we just want different things in life, and that's not wrong or bad. It's just, maybe we're not right for each other.
I kind of want to touch on the verse that seems to rub a lot of people the wrong way about wives submit to your husband, and husbands submit to your wives, or love your wives. I'd love to know your kind of outlook on it, and I feel like there's got to be something that people are missing in this kind of verse, in the way that they're looking at it, to make it so that it looks like a negative thing when it's supposed to be taken in a positive light, or be something that's actually really beautiful and part of the ceremony. So what kind of what are people missing about that verse?
Yeah, so I can understand, in today's culture and day and age, why it can be taken, and, people might not like it. Unfortunately, when there have been men who've abused power, you get a really bad taste in your mouth, around that, and you say, well, I don't want to submit to that, or I don't want to, live under that. But that is not the case when, St. Paul is talking about this in Ephesians 5. And if you actually look at a verse before that, which is verse 21, right before verse 22, where it says, wives, submit to your husbands as to the Lord. It says to submit to one another out of fear of the Lord, or out of reverence for the Lord. So it's this understanding that we are loving each other the way that we want to love Christ. We are submitting to one another the same way we want to submit to Christ. And it's not like I'm submitting to somebody who doesn't have my best interest at heart, right? Like, I know my husband would do anything for me and for the kids. He would protect us. I put my life in his hands. I know he can really be there for us and for me when I need it. Like, why would I not submit to that if he has my best interest at heart? And in the same way, when I'm treating him, it says, as to the Lord. So he is a flawed human being, like we all are. And I'm not doing it because, he checks off all these boxes, or because he did this for me, so I'll do this for him. But I'm doing it as I would, treat Christ. We say, treat others as you would be treating Christ, or see Christ in the people that you are interacting with. It's the same kind of concept. And honestly, I think the husbands have the harder command, which is, love your wife as Christ loved the church, to lay down his life for her. That's a big thing to, kind of swallow and really live out. It's not, that easy, but it's going all the way back to that struggle, between Adam and Eve, and the kind of the curse that came with the fallen nature and disobedience in the garden. So it's this, path in marriage that we have to regain that paradise that was lost. This thing that we, struggled with, whether it's pride or disobedience, unfaithfulness, and taking that and flipping it to the sacrifice, the obedience, the faithfulness, to regain that initial perfect state with the Lord.
And one of the things in the struggle section that you wrote that really grabbed my attention, and it sparked a question, was you said, surrender your life to God and fully submit to him, and he will guide you into the right relationship. And it kind of got me thinking about the difference between, or the balance between God's will and my obligation, and kind of how to navigate that line. Like, how do I know that I'm letting God work in the way that, he's supposed to, but while also still doing my part, because I don't think, a wife is just going to drop out of the sky and be ready to marry me. But, I also can't force a relationship that isn't meant to be, or something like that. So how do you kind of balance those two?
Yeah, it's a hard thing to navigate and to balance. And I think we can, struggle in this walk with God, whether it's making a big decision around like a spouse, or in other areas of our life of, picking a career, picking a move, picking this or that. And it's this synergy that we have with God where, we work together. I'm going to pray. I'm going to do my part. I'm going to take the steps that I know how to take. I'm going to ask God if he's going to bless it. I'm going to see if he's going to open the door or maybe close the door on it. Hopefully by that point, I have a relationship with God where I kind of pick up on how he speaks to me, how he guides me. So if you've seen him in your life in other areas, he'll be kind of the same way. So you are the same personality. I think God with certain people speaks to them in maybe soft ways, and they can pick up on that. And then with other people, he'll speak in very loud and hard ways, and that's the only way they can hear him, and kind of test the waters there with him. So know which one of the two you are. And as you're getting to know somebody, always pray for his will. Always, pray that if this is what he wants, that he will bless that for you.
Going back to your last answer, I love that you said that it came from you as a woman, that you said that the guy has the harder part to do, because I say that to people all the time, and they say, of course you'd say that, Abuna. But I do really believe that, because it's I think the man's role to be like Christ and to sacrifice himself and his entire life. Of course, as a woman, I would submit to that, because I am sure he is doing everything for my benefit, not for his own. And so, that dynamic, and I tell the men this, like, that dynamic begins with you. If you're not like self-sacrificial, she's not. Why would she be submissive? She's submissive when she's sure. Why is the church submissive to Christ? Is because the church is sure that Christ has her best interests in mind. And so, of course, we would submit. So I'm glad I heard that, from your perspective. That way I can
Yeah.
maybe give it a little bit more validity.
Well, it's easier said than done. It's definitely a struggle on my end all the time. But
Well, I mean, I think it's a struggle for both. I agree. I definitely agree. I was going to ask something that maybe wasn't, it was covered in the book very slightly, but I just wanted to know about your sort of experiences with this and maybe your thoughts on this. The concept of like dating over apps and all that kind of stuff that's sort of become actually very prevalent within not just our community, but just in general, and how that changes maybe some of the dynamics or even some of the advice that you've applied here maybe doesn't apply in the same way or has to be modified or adjusted. Do you think that the concept of being able to do this is a good thing overall? Do you think it's a bad thing? What are the challenges that you think? I just want to get maybe a little bit of your perspective on that. I mean, I have my own opinions, but I'd love to hear yours.
yeah, I mean, this whole new world of like online dating has skyrocketed in numbers. More people are meeting through apps and online than actually in person, and the way we used to more organically meet. And I think there could be books. There are books written about this, but I think there could be so much to be said. You can have a whole podcast episode just on online dating and navigating that, the pros and the cons. Um, the best way to kind of approach it is with the same mentality of the way I'm dating just in real life. It's just the mode of meeting, right? We're not dating online, we're just meeting online and taking that relationship in real life. The way the apps are kind of set up, this whole like swiping notion, this idea of like, oh, there's somebody better out there. Let me keep swiping until I find the best thing. If you're having that kind of mentality, you're never going to find the best thing because there will always be something else out there and you'll never be satisfied. So I don't recommend looking at it that way. I recommend saying, okay, this is what I'm looking for. Okay, let me see if this person can meet these, things or these requirements that I kind of have for myself. It's easy to talk to multiple people on the dating app. That's also how it's set up. I don't recommend doing this in person. If you're going on one-on-one dates, it's okay to like talk to different people. Maybe you're building a friendship to see if there is a potential of a romantic relationship. But this idea of, okay, I'm pursuing multiple people like intentionally, romantically, I don't recommend. I know there's a lot of mixed opinions about this out there of like talking to or dating multiple people. Like it's enough managing one person, right? It's enough remembering, all the things they're sharing with you and just keeping up with one. I don't know how you're going to do multiple. That's a lot of work.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, I think they're a blessing in the sense of they connect people who would have otherwise not been able to be, to even know each other. But I think it comes with its own challenges. Like you said, the concept of there's always something better, the concept of like at the first moment of sort of some friction or issue, like, well, I can just keep going or keep swiping. The concept of like talking to 3, 4, 5 people at the same time because I'm just casually getting to know all of them while not really getting to know any of them. I think those are some of the challenges, but I mean, I think it's a reality, and so we just have to learn how to use it. It's just like anything, right? The medium is neutral. How I use the medium is sort of going to determine for me whether it's something good or something bad. I want to talk a little bit about the last section of your book, the struggle. Actually, probably my favorite section of the book, to be honest with you. And even when I was looking at it, I was like, even for people who are maybe not dating at all, or maybe not, it's not necessarily about necessarily dating. It's just the concept of purity and things like that. I thought it would be really beneficial for people to read. I hope I could be able to give them to lead them to your book to show them some of the chapters. One of the things I wanted to talk about is the concept of purity, and you touched on it way in the beginning. How we were taught purity, and how that might be, although well-intentioned, maybe detrimental to how I view myself, given the context of my life experiences or my past failures or things like that. Maybe you could speak about that a little bit.
Yeah, so actually that part of the book, even though it's part 3, it's the first part that I wrote when I started writing the book, because I really do care a lot about this message. And it's for people who are single, it's for the teenager, it's for, the young adult, it's for the person who's, in their 30s, whether they're single or married. I think everybody, like you said, Abuna, can really, take something from it. And, some misconceptions that we might have been taught or, heard somewhere stuck with us is this idea of like purity can be something that you lose, or like I can never get it back. Maybe if we're referring to virginity, sure, there is that sense there, but purity is an ongoing struggle. I'm going to fall into sin sometimes, and I shouldn't beat myself up over it so much where I stay in this like self pity, or I say, how could you? And I beat myself over it of like, I should have known better. Like, you're human, you're going to sin. Just given the world that we live in, being so sexually saturated, it's everywhere you look. And it's everywhere, you are at home, it's on your phone, you're in school or in the workplace or in public, the conversations that are around you, it just, the temptation is everywhere, and it can't be avoided. You just really have to fight it. And the best thing you could do for yourself is understand what God is calling you to, understanding His commandments, also understanding His grace, His forgiveness. If like, okay, if I do fall, what do I do? How do I get back up again? And to not tie my self-worth and my value based on what I have done or I haven't done. So I can look at myself like a huge sinner if I've had previous sexual relations, or whatever it might be, or I can look at myself like, hey, I'm pretty good, I haven't done anything quote unquote what they consider bad or sexually immoral, but you do a lot of other things that are not so pure in the way you're thinking, what you're watching. Even if it's not with another person, there's a lot there that you can fall into. Christ in the New Testament says, if you just look at a woman, if you've lust after her, you've already committed adultery, with her in your heart. So it's not just about actions, but it's about our thoughts, our desires, and controlling that is not an easy thing.
Yeah, I really liked when you're speaking, especially about like impurity. You were talking about the concept that like sometimes we're taught, you use these like very, what I thought were very interesting analogies. The one about like sticky tape and like the treasure chest, and it really gives, I think, an anti-biblical and anti-Christian and anti-Orthodox concept of repentance. Like what do we believe about repentance? We believe that repentance brings somebody exactly to their previous state before their sin. And when we teach things like some of those things that you mentioned in that section of the book, you kind of teach like, well, if you've messed up, it's just too bad. There's not really much you can do about it. There's nowhere for you to go. And that despair actually is what we always talk about, as far as spiritual guidance. I talk about that in the context of actually satanic things. That's what the devil tries to convince me, that like I'm here and I've gotten here and there's no way out from that, and so therefore I might as well give up. And so I really appreciated that section of the book, and I think it's really vital for people to really understand that firmly. Actually, not only just about sexual sins, but in general, like repentance is something that is complete and perfect and brings me back to my state prior to sinning. Yeah, of course, sometimes there are consequences to my sin and repercussions for what I've done, definitely. But that doesn't mean, especially in the eyes of God, that I've become less than I was, when I started.
Yeah. And I think, there's a lot more education around, not using those kinds of analogies anymore. So for those who haven't, read the book, it's analogies like, and at least maybe more women have heard these things than men in my experience. You're like this beautiful flower, and every time you're with a guy, you're giving away a flower petal, and then by the end, when you get married, there's nothing else left of this, flower and the petals to give to your husband. And that's not what purity is, right? That's not what repentance. That's not how it works, right? Repentance and forgiveness does renew you. There is renewal in that. Of course, there's consequences, and there's consequences to sin, and those are also very obvious, and I go into detail about that in the chapter as well. But this idea of like, oh, I don't have anything else left, or I can't, uh, give my future spouse something of value because of my past, is a really incorrect and very dangerous way to think.
So on that topic of purity, I'm very curious. In the book, you mentioned, I think there was two different parts about purity while single and then purity while married, and I'm very curious what purity in marriage looks like. What is the meaning behind that?
Yeah. So, Satan likes to tempt us before marriage to, have sex and premarital relationships. And then once you get married, he likes to tempt you with the opposite of like, no, don't be intimate and don't love one another in this way. And hey, look at other people. And when you're married, I think, your focus, your eyes, your desires should only be for your spouse. I'm not looking at anyone else. I'm not fantasizing about anybody else, whether it's people that I know or like online with the whole porn industry, which, if you read some of the stats in chapter 9 on that, it's staggering and really mind blowing of how many people are struggling with it or, looking at things and watching things they shouldn't be watching, whether it's single or married. So guard your senses in that state of marriage and in singleness as well, to not fall into those temptations, into those traps.
One of the main topics, and I know we kind of touched about it, was the how to switch the mindset about viewing sex in a negative way prior to marriage, and then having to kind of change that concept literally overnight into now viewing it as this thing that God has made for us, and I feel like that's a very difficult thing to do. And I know there was a story in the book that you mentioned, and so I'm just curious if there's a better way that we should be teaching this or learning this, or I'm just curious your thoughts on that.
Yeah, it definitely starts with education. So I would recommend starting with chapter 8, but there's other resources out there as well that, go into this topic and explain, what God's intention for this marital relationship was in the beginning. It was a fruitful thing. It's a bonding thing too, right? Scientifically, even looking at it, it's a lot of oxytocin is produced in sex, and that's that bonding chemical. That's also seen in other forms of physical contact, but hear a lot more of it in this way for the benefit of the marriage, for that closeness, that bond. So it's something that God designed in us and how our bodies work. So unlearning maybe the unhelpful things that we picked up, from different sources growing up, maybe some things that we heard. So really re-educating yourself, and then with the future generation, let's now teach them the right way to look at it. Let's teach them, it's a gift from God and it's this beautiful thing, but the world has taken that and has corrupted it. Just being in this like hookup culture around this in the secular world doesn't help with that either. And differentiating the two, differentiating the right time and the wrong time for it, the purpose of it, and giving them a more holistic view of what it's all about.
And so one of the, I think, last questions that I have, and this is for you, Lilyan, and Abuna as well. In your experience, dealing and talking with couples, what would you say the number one kind of conflict that you that get brought up to you with couples that are either dating or newlyweds? What's the most common thing that is causing conflict between them?
The most common thing. It's a good question. And I'm not an expert in all things relationships. I'm here learning too, as I'm also doing my own research and educating myself. And I love learning. But I think one big thing that I maybe see is miscommunication, or people are communicating in the way they know how to communicate, but it's not being received well by the other person, and they both mean well. It's just coming out maybe a different way. And again, this can go back to like your childhood and how you grew up with your parents and your family, how they communicated, how communication was in your household. And if you're two people coming from completely different types of communication styles, you're going to bump heads a lot. And, communication is the basis of any good conflict resolution or just anything really in the relationship. So once you figure out that how to hear each other, listen to each other, I practice a lot of like active listening, sorry, with the couples. That usually helps. And yeah, that's probably one of the bigger issues.
Would you agree with that, or would you?
I do agree. I mean, I think there are a lot of things that people, we can find whatever we want to find to sort of disagree and argue about. And that's why I really liked, back when we were talking about the 5 Fs, when you mentioned fighting, I think that has a lot to do with communication. How, like, we are going to disagree. One of the, you mentioned briefly like research. One of the places that do a lot of research within relationships, something called the Gottmanist Institute. And they talk about like the 4 horsemen, like the things that sort of like doom a relationship. And one of the things they mention is like contempt. When I talk with somebody with contempt, so like when I'm disagreeing with you and I'm rolling my eyes and I'm huffing and puffing, and because it's like I don't want to hear you. And so when we reach to those sort of relationship issues, that's where it becomes very, very, very difficult to resolve. So those are kind of things that I see in either marriages or dating that really sort of put us in sort of like these dead end situations. Well, I wanted to at least, do we want to wrap up? Okay. I wanted to say thank you again to Lilyan for coming on the podcast for us. Her book is called Waiting and Dating. I think you can get it on Amazon. You can get it at Ancient Faith. It's a wonderful book. I really encourage anybody who has any questions about singleness, about dating life, even those who are married. It's a wonderful, great resource for them. So thank you again for coming on the podcast.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed this conversation, and a lot of really good points that you both mentioned.
All right, cool. Thank you, Lilyan. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Yes, of course.